Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform combining infrastructure monitoring, application performance monitoring, and log management into a one-stop shop. Datadog helps leading companies migrate to the cloud, transform to a microservices architecture, or transition from .NET to .NET Core. Their distributed tracing and APM provide end-to-end visibility into requests wherever they go, across hosts, containers, and service boundaries. See for yourself. Start a 14-day trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Taylor, and this is episode 66, TDD and the Terminator, with Layla Porter. In this episode, I interviewed Layla about test-driven development and how it can help with both developing your applications and protecting against regressions. Layla, for those who don't know, is a prolific live streamer, MVP, and was recently elected to the board of directors at the .NET Foundation. She's also a co-host of MK.NET and is a developer evangelist at Twilio. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So first thing I'd like to say, Layla, is thank you ever so much for spending some of your time talking to me and the listeners. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate that it's kind of in the middle of your workday. So hopefully we won't be keeping you too long, and your employers can, they won't be so upset with you taking all this time talking to me.
They'll be fine with it, so don't you worry. It's my pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much. So the first thing that I'd like to do, if that's all right, is could you perhaps introduce the listeners, tell them a little bit about you so that we know a little bit about like who Layla is and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, Jamie. So, hey, everybody. My name's Layla Porter. I am a Microsoft MVP. I'm a self-taught .NET C# developer. I work for a company called Twilio as a developer evangelist, so I'm not really a developer anymore. I do more developer relations, so it's kind of like developer marketing. If that's a swear word to you, I apologize. And recently I've been elected to the board of directors of the .NET Foundation, so hoping to make some meaningful change to the .NET Foundation. I'm very excited for that. And I am also the co-host of my local .NET user group or meetup called MK.NET in Milton Keynes, because that's where I'm based, which is about 50 miles north of London.
Excellent. So firstly, congratulations for being elected onto the board of directors at the .NET Foundation.
Thank you.
That must have been... I don't want to say a nice surprise because obviously you were put forward for it, but like, I don't know, was it a nice surprise? I literally don't know whether it would be a surprise or not.
So it went through like a nomination committee, and they selected 18 candidates from all the nominations. So that was a nice surprise to be put through. And then it was 2 weeks of, I was told, campaigning, and I wasn't quite sure what that would involve. But really, it was just writing like a statement, I guess a mission statement about why I'd like to be elected. And I also had an interview at the .NET Foundation YouTube channel just to talk a little bit further and answer a few questions about why I'd like to be elected. So, and it was really great to have the support of the community and to see one of the things, the way the .NET Foundation voting system works is they can break down, they actually show you the breakdown of votes. So it was very humbling to see that I was so well voted for, I have to say. It was that was the surprise, I guess, was how much support I had from the community, which was really humbling.
Excellent. Well, like I said, congratulations on that. Could you talk to us a little bit about the MK.NET meetup as well? Because
yes.
I've not had much of a chance to talk to many people who run meetups, you see. So
when I decided to change careers and be a developer, I started to look around and want to join meetups to help grow myself and maybe open up opportunities for employment. I started with a JavaScript meetup. That was all there was in Milton Keynes, which was fine because I was doing full stack. So I learned JavaScript with Free Code Camp. Then suddenly there was this .NET meetup starting. And I was like, I definitely want to go to that because I'd been learning C#, mainly C# in my learnings. So I was like, right, we'll go to that. So I've been to it from the start, and I was about a year into it that I was asked if I'd be a meetup organizer, and I was like, yeah, I could do that. I'm good at organizing things. So yeah, it's really grown from there, and we've now got a couple of other organizers on. Some people have moved on, and it's just really nice. What I've struggled with is to keep the community aspect of it since we've been in lockdown and unable to meet up. And I'm not 100% convinced about the virtual meetups because it loses that core essence of what I think a community meetup is about, which is sharing stories over a slice of pizza or a cup of cola or whatever, warm cola usually, and whilst you drop anchovies on the floor or something. And I think we've lost that because they're Zoom meetings and you've got people from all over the world, which in itself is fantastic that we've made it so much more accessible, but at the cost of that local community thing. So that's one aspect that's been a little bit sad from the lockdown, but a big plus is that it's more accessible. But yeah, I actually got my current job at Twilio through being a meetup. My now boss heard me speak at a meetup and approached me. So yeah, meetups are good.
I can attest to that. Whilst I did the sort of university path, I did computer science at university and picked up .NET whilst I was there. I was like, this is it. This is where I live. I love this. I do feel as though the university path isn't for everyone, and it's not as if the university path really set me up for anything related to what I actually do. I do like the idea of like the free code camps and code camps and people just going, you know what, I want to learn this thing. I'm going to find a group to help me sort of learn it. I love that idea because part of what I'm pushing towards with my own career is this sort of craftsperson level. So that I've gone and signed the software craftsmanship manifesto because I want to be able to push myself into new directions and also be, if at all relevant, sort of give back to people who are maybe, how do I put it, not as experienced as I am. If I can share my experiences and help them out and say, oh, you should totally go learn this thing, or I had some great experience using this or this particular technology in this particular setup, this particular problem. It isn't as easy to use as this other thing, or at least in my opinion, it wasn't. So maybe investigate both. And I think that kind of helps when you're starting out. I feel finding someone or a group of people who you can sort of bounce ideas off of and get information about what should I look up, where should I go, especially if you're technology adjacent. If you're not a developer, but you want to learn it, well, how do you go about it, right? You got to find some people who can help you.
Yeah, I think the knowledge share is really powerful. I was lucky that my partner is a developer, and I think you do need a slight aptitude. I did go to university and I had to leave due to a loss of finances because I was a foreign student, so I couldn't get loans or things, and I actually did mathematics, so I've got that kind of logical brain. But then I did shop work and I worked in retail when I left uni, and fell into lots of different careers, from professional horse rider and more recently a Pilates teacher and things like that. And but I'd always dabbled in code. I played with ActionScript, and I love computers. I was a gamer since sort of my early teens, and I love graphic design and computer graphic design, I should say, and building tools in Illustrator and, designing with Illustrator, and playing with those. And I actually tried to go back to university to do graphic design, but nothing ever worked out. So I just sort of messed around with code and taught myself ActionScript, and I've always been one of those people who tries to teach themselves things. Oh, I fancy trying that, so I'm going to play with it, and I do it. So when it came to learning to code, I was very lucky that I had my partner who could mentor me and help me, even though he had his day job. So I was learning in the day, but if I got really, really stuck, I had him as a fallback. And I think having mentors is so important. And I'm a big believer in giving back. And that's another reason to go to meetups, because you can make yourself available as a mentor, or someone that someone can come and ask the question that they're really insecure about asking because they think it's stupid. And that's one of the reasons why I stream on Twitch, actually, because I want it to be a safe place where there are no stupid questions, and you can come in and ask the most inane question. If that's what's troubling you, please ask, and I think mentorship is amazing.
It really is. It really is. And I mean, I haven't really had much of a chance to do it, but when I've been mentored by other people, it's been an absolutely amazing experience because, like you say, you're wondering, is this a stupid question? Is this something that I should just Google and just trust the first thing? Or should I go and ask this person that I respect and worry about them saying, that's a stupid question? But if you've got a good mentor and someone that you do truly respect, then I feel like they wouldn't say that's a stupid question.
No, they shouldn't.
Yeah. Because there are no stupid questions.
No.
It doesn't matter what industry you're in, or no matter how much experience you have, there are no stupid questions. The way that I see it is you're stupid not to ask the question, but that's kind of mean anyway. But like, if you're unsure, ask, because otherwise you're never going to know, right? You're only going to assume.
And I think it's good to make ways for people to ask the question in a way that suits them, whether, and this is another problem with the virtual meetups, because everyone's in a big Zoom room, and the person who's not confident speaking, like unmuting and talking to the whole room, they stop asking the questions. Whereas you could be in the queue for food and, you just naturally talk to the person beside you or behind you or in front. And, oh, did you enjoy the talk? Or, oh, what do you do? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, oh, can I ask you a question about like X, Y, and Z? And you could be like, oh, yeah, that's because of this. Whereas if it's in a Zoom room, they'll be like, I'll just Google that, or I don't need to know that badly. It's about making safe environments and different ways for people to ask that question, whether through, like some people want to ask it in a direct message on Slack or Twitter, or they're quite happy to put their hand up or unmute and ask it in front of everybody. And that's okay too. And if you're thinking it, maybe someone else will ask it, but if you're thinking it and have the confidence to ask it, even if you kind of know the answer, or you think the speaker didn't clarify it, and you think, I reckon beginners might not understand that. And then what I will do, even though I know, for example, what the speaker's talking about, to try and make it more accessible to juniors and new developers, I will ask the speaker a question that I think other people might be wondering, and I'll be the voice of those people to try and help open up that thing. And I think that's another thing that you can do as a mentor, is ask the questions that you think people might want to know.
Absolutely. It's I feel like it's potentially not an easy thing to be a mentor, and that's why I'm sort of like, I'm not doing it officially. If somebody wants to ask me a question, I'll happily answer it, or I'll say, I don't know, but let's find out together. Because then it's also a case of, you've learned the answer to your question, but also I want to know what it is as well, right? Because you've identified a gap in my knowledge, and I want to fill that gap, so that then A, I'll know for next time when I need to do it, and B, if someone ever asks me again, I go, oh, right, well, last time I looked it up, it was this, right?
Yeah, no, that's really it. I have a thirst for knowledge and things like that. It's like, let's go figure it out. And also, by you learning about it and you learn together, you get better at explaining it as well. And it deepens both your understandings of it. So it's really, it's a win-win.
Absolutely. So what about so I happen to know that you have a workshop coming up. And I also happen to know that you do Twitch streaming as well. I thought maybe we could cover both of those at once.
Yeah, sure.
We talked off air about how one is kind of linked to the other a little.
Yeah, so I was streaming on and off last year, and I could never commit to it because part of my job is to travel. A good deal of my job is to travel all over Europe and North America to speak at conferences and sponsor conferences and run like first party, we call them Twilio workshops and events. So I couldn't ever dedicate the time to streaming properly last year, but something happened this year that meant I was at home a lot and was able to dedicate the time that I felt I wanted to dedicate to streaming. So I started to do that. And I also had this other idea from the stuff I did with Twilio. And we have this cool tool at Twilio called Twilio Quest to help people not only learn about Twilio, but also to help them get into programming. We have JavaScript and Python, and I think we've got PHP, all for beginners with nothing about Twilio, and you can just learn to program in gamified learning. So I was doing that, and I was in Tel Aviv running this workshop, and I've never been to Tel Aviv before, and the developers there are super, super smart and they knew everything. And the beginner the introductory and small demos that Twilio Quest gave weren't sufficient for them. And I started to think about what could I do that would be a better experience for developers wanting to learn about Twilio. And this goes for developers wanting to learn about anything. It just so happens I want to learn about Twilio. So I was like, right, how can they integrate various different Twilio communication APIs? We're all communication and security APIs. How can they link several of those into a cool application that we can build? And originally this was going to be an in-person workshop I ran, but I had to pivot quite quickly when all of that went out the window. So I decided to make it a video series. But I didn't really know where to start, which is where the Twitch streaming came in, and it became content for my Twitch stream to build out this application and iron out all the little small details, all these considerations that I'd never had to think about before that I now had to because I was creating this workshop. And I could start to iron those out on stream with viewers of all levels going, oh, but I don't understand that. Or why did you do it that way? So the end YouTube videos that I've created, well, they're not on YouTube yet. They might go on, let's say videos, are much better for it because they've almost been tested by the users as I built them.
Okay, excellent. And that links in with the workshop that you're putting together because you're testing it almost on Twitch beforehand. Yeah,
so I build it out on the application I built out completely on Twitch, and then I rebuilt it, refining it, and recorded it all at the same time onto video, narrated, and that's a very long-winded process. If you think, I think it's about 4.5 hours of video, and you might think, oh, that took about 8 hours. Oh my goodness, no, that was about 2.5 months of recording some video 5 days a week. I've never undertaken something like that. It was a huge undertaking. And then you'd be like, oh, that was really rubbish, or I did that terribly. And you'd have to re-record and re-record and re-record. And then you watch it back and you're like, oh my goodness, I made a right dog's breakfast of that and how to explain that. But the more I did it, the better I got. And that could transfer back to Twitch as well, because I got better at explaining things. And it really improved my depth of understanding. So the whole thing, has been a wonderful experience, and I hope I get to do more.
Yeah, excellent. So does the workshop have a name at the moment, or is it still sort of like Layla's workshop that's currently untitled?
So it's learning to build with ASP.NET Core and Twilio, because that's what it does. And the app we build is called the Cloud City Cake Company online ordering system. So we actually build an ordering system so users can order their cake via WhatsApp. And so I showed them how to do all of that with this really cool, like WYSIWYG serverless tool we have at Twilio called Studio. And you basically drag and drop all these different elements onto, whether that's an HTTP request or a reply to an incoming message or voice call, and you can just build up this whole like chatbot we basically built with it, all using WhatsApp. And I chose WhatsApp because the good thing about WhatsApp is that it works all over the world, whereas what a lot of people don't know is there are so many restrictions on telephone numbers in different countries and policies, and you can't always buy numbers in certain countries, and you can't always buy a number that's got SMS capabilities or buy a number with voice capabilities. But WhatsApp works everywhere. So it was really good to work with that. And it's one of my favorite APIs, I have to say. It's so much fun. So we built that. And then, well, what do you do once you've taken this cake order off someone? Well, you've got to send it to an app and save it. So then the next stage was to build an app. Well, I chose an MVC app. It needed to be .NET Core, obviously, because it should be, and it's cross-platform. And that was really important to me, that it was cross-platform, to welcome developers on all platforms. So we built a .NET Core 3.1, and I chose MVC because I thought it's easy to understand, maybe not as easy as Razor Pages for a beginner, but it's still easier than, say, something bleeding edge such as Blazor. And if you had experienced devs, they're more likely to be on an MVC platform, whether that's framework or whatever. They'll be able to integrate the ideas in the workshop into their existing platform. So it seemed like a good choice. So we built that out, and we built in a little UI with some Bootstrap, nice and simple. And then we learned how to send invoices attached on emails via SendGrid, and also how to send like updates via WhatsApp. So it was cool to integrate it all into one application. And we did some really good refactoring in there, putting in some patterns, touched on a bit of solid. But no TDD or unit testing whatsoever. Something had to give, I have to say. So it was the testing.
I totally understand that. If you're sort of aiming to get less experienced developers using something they haven't used before, you don't want to confuse them by adding lots and lots of different extra. Right? Okay, now that we've got the idea, before we write anything, we have to write some tests. Well. Or indeed, once we've written it, now we're going to go back and write some tests. Whereas, like, I want to get to the point where I have a working application and I understand how it works. And then if I want to later on, I can go back and add tests. Not the best, maybe not, depending on how people feel about it, it may be not the best way to do it, but at least you have tests anyway, once you've finished. And then I like the idea of, I also like the idea of using MVC rather than Blazor and Razor Pages, because MVC's been around for 10, 15, 17 years, something like that. And so there's lots of support and documentation, so that if someone comes away from this workshop and wants to extend it, but perhaps they've understood exactly what you're saying, but there's something that they want to add that you didn't touch on, there's at least a decade worth of documentation and videos and resources that they can sort of go and look at. Oh, this is how I add this. This is how I add this. Whereas if it was Blazor, I mean, up until late last year, Blazor kept changing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been a roller coaster with Blazor. And Razor Pages is one of the most beginner friendly frameworks, but I've never used Razor Pages. I mean, I can go in and use Razor Pages, but I've never used it. And I just thought, I'm not confident with Razor Pages to build a workshop on. And I also think it's also newish, and there's not that. I don't know how many in production apps are built on Razor Pages. I don't know any of that data, whereas I know a lot of production is on MVC. All of my career, I've worked on MVC. And most of the devs I've spoken to are all working on MVC, all right through framework. They were on MVC. And as you say, it's long established. And so it would span more developers if I used MVC as the platform. It's still beginner friendly, but those experienced devs coming in, yeah, I know this. I know how to use MVC. Let's get into the meat of how to use Twilio. So it just seemed like the most natural fit. And I love MVC, and I'm still a big advocate for MVC. So it's great. And if you don't know what MVC is, it stands for Model View Controller, just popping that out. So, and it's a pattern, not just restricted to .NET. It's used on multiple different programming languages. So yeah, it's a very good pattern.
It is. It's one of the, I think one of the easiest ones to sort of get started with when you're doing web stuff, because it just kind of, it fits really well. There's lots of separation of concerns. There's lots of, lots of separations of concerns. That's how I'll put it. That's you don't have one huge block of code doing everything. You've got a smallish block of code doing the thing. There's a reference that I use that I don't think many people get, and that is from an episode of MASH, which was a sitcom in the 70s. The character says, I do one thing at a time. I do it very well. And then I move on. And that's how I feel about the MVC pattern. Each block of code does one thing and one thing alone.
And that makes it really testable as well, because I have no idea how one would get into Razor Pages and write a test. Everything is munged together. And I've had to work with Razor Pages a lot in the past couple of months, because I've been doing a lot with ASP.NET Identity. And that is I think it's called a Razor Core library, or a Core Razor library, Razor class library, something to do with Razor and library. And it's all sort of a kind of black boxed. But if you want to customize it at all, you then have to scaffold, which is a way of doing code generation and bringing in this stuff, well, extracting the black boxed pages and views out into your code so you can modify them. And it's all Razor Pages. And I forced myself to do it in MVC. And so now I've got munged application of MVC and Razor Pages, which has been challenging. And I'm building this on Twitch, ready for my next workshop, which will build on the existing workshop for Cloud City Cake Company and add in identity and logins and things like that. So I'm experimenting with it. But I look at these Razor Pages where you have the code behind, it's called, the code behind the view. You have the model related to the view. So it's kind of like the view model's there. You've got your code in there. You can bring reference out external code, obviously, which you could test elsewhere. But I don't know how you test this code in the code behind. I'm sure there must be ways, but because there isn't that separation of concerns and it's all munged in and it's doing lots of things all at the same time, it's not doing that one. In my brain, it's like, I don't know where to start.
Sure. I totally get that. I must admit that because I've been working with .NET since the early days, when I saw Razor Pages, I went, it's web forms. No, not again. Never again.
It's easier than web forms because it doesn't have that at the bottom of web forms. I did a little work with web forms. You have that massive sort of state management bit at the bottom of web forms, don't you? And I don't think Razor Pages have that. So they're an improvement over web forms, which is still widely used. But they just don't fit well in my brain. And it's all what works in your brain, and all our brains work differently and learn differently. So it's really important to find something that fits with your brain. Like I keep trying to learn F#. I've done 3 awesome workshops with F#, which is also on the .NET platform, and it's functional programming. I cannot get that into my head. It doesn't work. My brain doesn't work. F# works, but my brain and F# don't work together. So it's all about finding something that works for you.
Absolutely. And you also have to think about the end client, whoever you're building the application for, don't really usually care which technology, which language, which framework, which methodology you use. They just care about, I didn't have a thing, and now I have a thing. That's all they care about. You have solved my problem for me. It doesn't matter to from their point of view whether it's C#, whether it's F#, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Ruby on Rails, whatever it is. They really don't care what technology is running, as long as when they push the button, they get whatever it is that they want out of it.
Yeah, very true.
Excellent. So we hinted at earlier on there that your new workshop doesn't have TDD because it would be a little bit more complex to build in, just because TDD itself is quite a complex topic. Yeah. But I thought that maybe we could talk about TDD, if that's all right.
Yes,
excellent.
Absolutely. I am a massive advocate of TDD. And that's why I always get people joking with me that a lot of my projects don't have even unit tests in, let alone be developed in a test-driven development manner. And so it's horses for courses, isn't it? When you're building a workshop and you want to make sure that people understand the content you want them to, you don't want to clutter it with additional patterns. If I want to teach someone how to do TDD, I'll do a workshop on TDD. And I need to have separation of concerns on my workshops. So if I am building something in production, then now I will always build in a TDD manner. And that came from one job I was at. We didn't have any unit tests at all. Nothing. No integration tests. Zip. We relied solely on a team of 6 testers, one of which was using Selenium, and everyone else was just manually testing. And we only did like a release every year or 18 months on this monolith of a project. And so we'd be hands off. We'd hand over the release to the testers, and then it would take about a month. They'd test it all and they'd come back. And it was after this last release I did at this company, and after 9 weeks I was still fixing regression bugs, that I thought there really must be a better way. And I was still quite early on in my career, so, I hadn't had the breadth of knowledge, and I started to look into it, and I was like, well, we could have some tests. So I looked into that and found out more about TDD. And I also started to look into solid principles as well, which are design principles that we won't go into, but they apply across all programming languages. And, they've been around since, I think, the late 80s, the solid principles. So very long established. And I was like, oh, this fits my brain. So I remember what I was saying about things need to fit your brain. This TDD and solid principles really suited my brain. I could really get behind this. So I started to try and teach myself TDD with the hopes of getting a job at a company that employed TDD methodologies. Because I spoke to my current employer, they basically laughed me out the room. Oh, no, we don't do TDD. Solid's a swear word around here. And I was like, okay, then. So I was like, right, so I need to start upskilling so I can move on and work in an environment that I want to. So I tried to learn TDD. Well, this was epic fail. If there was a compilation of me trying to learn TDD, I think YouTube would be having a payday, because it was failure after failure. Every video I watched, it looked like magic. Literally, they're like, everything's gone green. I'm like, wait, what? Huh? How did it go green? I don't understand. What did you do? You did some magic. And normally with a video, they've sped it up as well. And I'm trying to follow this, and it's going really quickly. And I'm like, wow, can they type so quickly? Because I'm so stressed about trying to learn that I don't realize that they've got it on like 2 times speed or whatever. So watching videos didn't work for me. And I watched Pluralsight videos, YouTube videos, all sorts of videos. And I was like, okay. So I looked at books, and then someone tries to explain it in books. I'm like, this doesn't work either. And then I was following tutorials and blogs, and I'm like, I sort of get it, but I don't get it. And I was like, right. And I'd probably just rewatched Terminator again. And Terminator is one of my favorite franchises. And my favorite movie is Terminator 2. I love that. The new ones have been quite good as well, but we won't go off onto our Terminator critiques. It was either going to be Terminator or Alien. I love the Alien franchise as well. So I went with Terminator because I'm like, I'm going to develop a killer robot for TDD, and I'm going to do this. So I started my project, and I thought, right, the first thing you need with if you're going to do test-driven development is some requirements, because how can I write my tests if I don't know what my code should do? So I was like, okay, so we've got to hunt down children and women and kill them or whatever. And so I wrote some loose requirements. I'm like, okay, so what's my Terminator need to do? Well, it needs to examine children, and if it's a boy, investigate further because it could be John Connor. So I was like, okay, I can write that. And so finally I started to get into TDD, and I could start to write, okay, I'm going to write this test. And by writing out the name of the test method, like Terminator should investigate further if it's a boy, I could start to go, oh, okay, so now I know what my test needs to do. And then I could write my code. Now, I still wasn't doing it because I was doing one of these big mistakes that people do with TDD. They write a unit test to start with, so they're doing TDD. Great. Then they go over to the code, and all of a sudden they've got like a massive switch statement or a whole load of code. And then they come back and my test passes. I should write the next test now. So what they've done is they've written all their code, and now they're doing unit testing because it's not test driven, but they're coming to write their tests after the fact. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not TDD. So I was kind of in this rut. I'd do a couple of tests and then I'd just get around to unit testing, which was great because I was still learning how to write unit tests. So I was really happy with that. And I actually went for a job interview at a company that did TDD. And I told them, they were looking for a senior developer doing TDD. And I said, I'm good for the senior level, but I've never done TDD. So they said, okay, well, we'll pair program on the technical test. I was like, fine. And so they went through and showed me the TDD, and something clicked. By pair programming with someone, I was like, now I really get it. I didn't get that job. They said I wasn't experienced enough in TDD. Like I wasn't upfront about that. But anyway, they did me a huge favor, because they really, by pair programming with that lead developer who was interviewing me, I was like, yes, I've got it now. And the thing that he showed me, which was my big aha moment, was when you write something like a Terminator should investigate children, and if it's a boy, return true. The actual code I should write is just simply return true. And that was my aha moment. And that's what I try and share with people when I talk about TDD, is you write the least amount of code to get your test to pass. And it was once I got that everything slotted into place for me. And I was like, I've got this. So I went on to have another interview, and I got that job. And so I got my first TDD based development job, and I was really pleased. And that was a really forward-thinking company where they were like, right, we're going to sit you down with this fellow beside you, and you two are just going to pair program every single afternoon. And that was revelationary for me. I was just, after like a week of pair programming, I really had it cemented in, and I could just start developing with it. I think it's having the time to allow you to get that culture change and adapt and understand, which is often missing when people try to do TDD. And I was really fortunate that I went to that company and not the first company, where they just sat me down and let me pair program and learn how to do it. So that I was very fortunate with that.
Excellent. areyouadev is the only program exclusively for .NET developers. Learn how to prototype, code, launch, and market your mobile app product, whether you're an indie developer starting out or a dev lead wanting to bring mobile development in-house. Interested in ML.NET? Are You a Dev shows how to utilize ML.NET in your mobile product, walking you through the code, functional limitations, and the privacy implications you need to be aware of when using machine learning. Try out the program for free at areyouadev.com, that's areyouadev.com, and get a complimentary 20-minute one-to-one chat with a fellow developer to ask any program or technical questions.
You have kind of explained kind of what TDD is there. It's my point of view is you write a unit test that fails, or you write a test, that fails, and then you go write the least amount of code required to make that test pass. Like you said there, if you have something that should return true, you just public bool my method parentheses, squiggly brackets, return true, squiggly brackets. That's your test now passes. And then you write the next test, and then you iterate on that. And I think I've heard the term red, green refactor. You write the unit, or rather write the test, write the code that passes the test, then write the next test, and it'll fail. So then you refactor to make the new test pass, which likely will make the previous test fail. You refactor to make them both pass, and then you carry on.
Yeah. And I use the red-green refactor pattern as well. And if you're not getting red tests, it means you've gone and done what I used to do, which is written a whole load of code and then come back to write unit tests. And I just want to say that that's okay. There are some purist TDDers out there. And I've had people threaten to delete a whole day's worth of code because they're like, you haven't written this all TDD, because, it's starting off. And so there is a way of doing it in a purist fashion. I'm more of a pragmatist. And I think these tools should work for you, not be a hindrance. And if most of the time I'm doing TDD and then occasionally I come back and do some unit tests after the fact, or actually I'm not going to write tests for this at all or unit tests for this at all, because I'm going to do an integration test because it's a data access, and writing unit tests for data access is somewhat painful, then that's okay. You've got to make the tools and patterns work for you and your product and your team and your customers. So I'm very much about being a pragmatist in these matters.
Absolutely. It's about what works for you and the team in solving the problem. Like you say, if you're doing something that's data access, then you're not going to write a unit test, which means that you may not want to do TDD. You definitely don't want to do a unit test, which means that perhaps get the code working, make sure that it compiles, make sure it builds. Okay, now I'll write a test for it, or a suite of tests. Or maybe you'll go, I'll write the suite of tests, it'll all fail, and then I spend a week writing the actual code and realize, actually, that's not doing what we want it to do. So I got to spend another week rewriting it all, right?
Yeah. Or you might go off and do a spike and go, there must be a better way. And suddenly you come back with some microservice that takes it all away and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Absolutely. I will say from my personal experience, I do know that I've seen a lot of people try and write unit tests, integration tests, and TDD for the libraries they're pulling in, not around the libraries they're pulling in. So let's take an entity framework as an example. I've seen people write unit tests for entity framework because they're using entity framework. And I turned to them and said, I think you're going a little bit too far there, because I'm going to trust that the authors of entity framework have tested it. And if you're worried about that, maybe you've got obviously nothing to worry about with your code if you're testing other people's code.
Yeah, never test other people's code, only test your own. And this comes up to something, a bit of a debate I had recently with some people about testing, doing null checks in constructors when you have dependency injection. I do them out of habit. Even if I'm not doing any tests, if I'm writing demos, I'll still write a null coalescer on an injected value. And some people are in the camp where they're saying, oh, you should test it. And other people are like, now you're testing the dependency injection layer, and you should trust that that's been written and tested by whoever the service is that you're using, whether that's the built-in .NET Core or Ninject or whichever one you're using, that you should trust absolutely that someone's done the testing and you can assume safely that it's going to work. I don't know how I feel about that. I probably am still going to write null coalesces in my constructors.
I feel like it's a good idea anyway, because what if you're writing some code that, okay, your constructor does take a whole bunch of things in and you're relying on the dependency injector, but what if you need to create an instance of that class without dependency injection being around?
Yeah.
Or somehow you do indeed pass a null in. Something somewhere has gone slightly wobbly and you've got a null coming in. You don't want the entire app to blow up. I totally get that.
Yeah, I think one place where someone said it can happen is if you use the iOptions pattern and you're bringing in that, your code will compile and you won't get an error on your IOC. But when it comes to actually extract the value out of the iOptions, you'll get a null then and an error. So that was one place where they said, yes, you should check that your the value in your iOptions injectable is coming through. So that was definitely, yes, I've had that where I've forgotten to bring in my configuration and add it to the iOptions. And then when I try and use it in a class, it's not there. So I think I will always write null coalesces on it.
No, I totally agree. I tend to use guard clauses in some places, not everywhere, but in some places, because with my guard clauses, I tend to raise an exception because in that instance where I'm using that guard clause, it is exceptional to not have, say, if I'm expecting a string and it comes in null or it comes in empty, that's an exception. That is exceptional circumstances.
Absolutely.
Whereas in the constructor, it's not really, I mean, can you get away with using a default value? I think in most instances, you should be able to get away with passing in a default value. And that's where I would use a null coalescer. I'd say, this injected value, null coalesce, or a default value or a new instance or something, because at least then the code's working and you can you can protect against that later on.
Yeah. And one thing, I learnt when I was doing TDD was to use exceptions for exceptional things and not for code flow. So that was something that was really interesting. And I'd never had that before. We'd use, we'd throw exceptions and swallow them and then carry on and do all sorts of things. And then my lead dev at the new place where I was doing TDD was like, if something is an exceptional thing that we can't think of it happening, that's when you throw an exception. So that was a really interesting thing that's always rattled around in my head. Should this be an exception, or is there something I can do? Is this likely to happen? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about TDD. What I'd like to know from your point of view are what are some of the positive points and some of the negative points? Because like you said there, everything has its positive and its negative, right? There are some things that just work for some people and some things that just work for other people. And so in your opinion, from your experience of using TDD, what are some of the positives and some of the negatives?
So the biggest positive for me with TDD is having clear acceptance criteria from your product owners and stakeholders. It really improves the relationship with the people asking you to write the code. If you've been explicit saying, there's not enough information here, I need more information, they go away and think about it more, give you more requirements, and you know exactly what they want. Therefore, you write code that fulfills that need, and they're happier and you're happier. So that's a huge thing for me, because you can't write your tests first unless you've got clear acceptance criteria. Another big thing I love about it, but you get this from unit testing, is that safe refactoring. So I would never have had the 9 weeks of regression bug fixing if we'd had a test in somewhere, a unit test, anything, any way. That would have been amazing. And we wouldn't have had to go through all of that pain. So those are huge positives. I think the negatives are more cultural than to do with the code. So there can be a lot of pushback from product owners and stakeholders and developers that TDD slows you down. But I think if you're not doing TDD or unit tests, you're accruing technical debt. So it's going to just hit you later. So it's like a false perception of the time you're investing upfront by getting proper acceptance criteria, by getting all of that testing framework in place. Because what you'll generally see is that productivity will have a massive dip when you start with TDD. Everyone slows down. You've got devs who are generally pair programming because it's a really good practice to have pair programming, even with two senior devs. It's not always about a senior dev and a junior dev. I think having two senior devs together can have amazing outcomes when you pair program. And it's a way of sharing knowledge and experience as well. So you see this dip. But once you get past that dip and you start to make some progress and a lot of the groundwork and the foundations there, you'll start to see things get quicker and quicker and quicker. Refactors are quicker, new features are quicker because we're not breaking things. Everything's in place, structure's in place. We've thought about how to architect everything in the best possible way to suit all of the criteria that we've got. So you start to see this huge sweep up. Now, trying to sell that to even non-technical people, they're like, right, we're going to have a big reduction in productivity. And they're like, no, how can we do that? And that's the hard thing. And it can be disheartening for developers who are used to being high producers. So they know that they get through all the things they're assigned in their sprint. And normally they're going to the backlog and pulling more things off. And all of a sudden, the team's not getting through the entirety of the sprint. And the next sprint, we're having to reduce the number of use cases we bring over and stories and etc. and tasks. And so they're like, why are we so slow? Are we being stupid? What's going on? So that you have to make a safe environment for developers who are used to high rates of productivity to be okay with the slowdown in their production and not concerned about this at all, and make sure that they know that this is to be expected and they're not going to be penalized. So I do think it's much more around the culture than TDD itself. Now, I do say that you can do a spike with TDD and unit testing. And other people are like, no, you just want to hack things. Well, I think there's a happy medium here. If you're just going to hack things to get to a point in a spike, well, you want to have a couple of tests so you know that your spike has fulfilled what you're out there to look at. So I'd say write a couple of tests. We're not going testing all the constructors. We're just going to go, does this method return 200, for example? And so you want to make sure that your end results and the expected outcome of your spike or the purpose of your spike are covered in a couple of tests. So I think this is where I come from, that practical approach. You want to have a couple of things in there just to make sure it's working. Or if you're not sure where the problems are, you can pinpoint them because you've got those tests. So yeah, it can get a lot of stick. But I think it's worth pushing through and knowing the positives so you can sell it.
Okay, that makes sense. I would also argue that testing, or rather automated testing, regardless of whether you do TDD upfront or you do tests afterwards, is immediately cheaper than doing sort of manual scripted tests. My point for that is the further away the code gets to the developer, the more expensive it is to revisit and fix a bug. And that has been scientifically proven over the past 20 to 30 years, and there's no way that you can actually argue against those numbers. No. The further it gets away from the developer, the more expensive it is. And if you have automated tests that take less than 30 seconds to run versus a script of manual tests that takes a week to run, which is going to be quicker to run? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having scripted manual tests, but those are the expensive ones because it takes someone's time to run them.
Yeah.
Whereas an automated test that runs like that can be run every time code is checked in.
Yeah.
Which means that you know that the code you have checked in isn't going to break anything else that someone else has checked in, because you may be looking at a relatively small portion of the code. It's maybe a big slice of the code to you, but the overall code base is huge, right? Let's use the analogy of a pizza, right? We talked about pizza earlier on. You're working on one slice of pizza. It's going to fall over because analogies and metaphors fall over. But when you put that slice of pizza into the box, everything else breaks. The box falls to pieces. The rest of the pizza falls out of the box for whatever reason. And by having a test so that when you put that slice of pizza in the box, you can make sure that it doesn't all fall to pieces.
Yeah.
And being able to do that for every single time that you put the slice of pizza in the box. See what I mean? The analogy doesn't work, but you get the idea, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's having that stops all these bugs getting checked in. When you have, so over time, big projects can have hundreds of thousands of tests, because for one class, you might be writing 30, 40 tests. And you think how many classes and how many services you have, and it all starts to build up into thousands of tests. And if every time you check that in, your build server's going through all of those, and it may take 5 minutes, it may take 30 minutes. But isn't that better than waiting for, someone else to come along and do it? And instantly, oh, my check-in failed. What did I break? And you go and fix it then while it's all loaded into your head. And I think code is all about having it loaded into your head. Because if you, there's lots of research done into when you disturb a developer, it takes them a good, I want to say 5 minutes, but I think it's longer. I think if you chat to them for 5 minutes, it takes them 30 minutes to get back into their flow or something like that. But there's a lot of research around that. And so the best time to fix bugs is when it's all loaded in your head and you're working on it right there and then. We had these, remember I said the releases were sort of every year, 18 months. So I have no idea about the code that someone else wrote a year ago, and they're not even here anymore, Mm-hmm. And then you're like, I haven't, I don't know. And you start reverse engineering it. And then they've done some smart coding. Let's try and get what was 20 lines of readable code down into some kind of ternary, nested ternaries I've had to deal with. And I'm like, why? Why do we have nested ternaries? So
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're really right. As soon as the developer can see the errors, they're able to fix it much quicker.
I would caveat a couple of things you've said there with,
go on then.
An hour after you've checked in the code, you are a different developer. So you said that I don't know what this other developer has written. That other developer was you, or it could be someone else. Just the pure fact that you've moved on to another task, you've lost all of that context. So Very true. Are effectively a different developer. Right.
Yeah.
And the nested ternaries, I absolutely despise those. And I despise nested link statements, because Steve McConnell in Code Complete, one of the sort of accepted texts for how you should write programs, he says, I think he uses a bit of Star Trek when he says it. He says, our prime directive as developers is to write the most humanly readable code possible. Because it doesn't matter how smart you are, the compiler is going to be smarter, and it will make the compiled code even better. So the only person that really matters when you're writing code, the authorship, the readership of your code, is people. If people can't read it, you've done a bad job.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. Especially when you're looking at nested ternaries.
Mm-hmm. Because it's not going to be a computer that debugs that, is it? It's going to be a human. So humans got to be able to read it. And yes, you may want to show off how smart you are by doing 15 layers of nested. Please don't ever do 15 layers of nested ternaries. But you may want to show off just how smart you are to be able to combine all of these if statements and switch statements into a 15-layer ternary. But in 25 minutes, when you come to debug it, you aren't going to be able to make head nor tail of this. Yeah. It's that simple.
I do feel quite clever when I do some slightly complicated link, though, from memory. I feel like a real developer. So you can get really stupid with link and make them really deep. But There's been some where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really nice, tight query. Still readable, because that's key, as you say. But I do feel like a proper developer then when I can do that from memory.
Because that's the other thing as well. If you've got a big ternary or maybe 25 link statements all chained together, that's not testable at all.
No.
Or,
It's
like I
not.
said, debuggable. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't stick anything that's got an extension method on, you're making it harder and harder for yourself. And then you have to start trusting, you need to be testing extension methods, or it just gets more and more complicated. And it goes back to that single responsibility principle as well. You want things to only have responsibility for a single piece of that functionality. And, with some leeway there as well. But you don't want, if you've got 25 nested, I'm getting bigger now, a ternary of 25 nested ternaries, well, that's a lot of different things happening. That's a lot of potential code exits as well. So where are you going to test? Where do you know when that fails? How do you know what part of the test is failing? What's responsible for that test? And that's one of the big reasons why we use dependency injection, because we don't want to worry about, is it when we newed it up, did we not give it everything we needed? Is that issue in the class that we newed up somehow? We don't know. And that's why we come to use dependency injection. And a lot of people are like, why? Well, you shouldn't use dependency injection, but we're extracting that dependency out to make things more testable and just loosely coupled, so we can change things without worrying about other bits of code.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you there. So as we're coming up to about an hour, I don't really want to keep you all day, if that's all right, just because you're a busy person, I'm a busy person, and the listeners will be like, another 4 hours of TDD, this is not going to work. So what would be your top resources for learning TDD the Layla way? Because I only say that because you said earlier on that videos didn't work for you, tutorials didn't work for you, but sitting down with someone did. Is that the way that you would recommend people go about it?
Yeah. So I would say start by watching online resources and reading blogs. If that works for you, you're laughing. That's great. If it's still not clear, and even if it is clear, build your own little mini project, like I did with the Terminator. Come up with an analogy that works for you, something that you can break down into small, actionable requirements, units of work. And you can want to go and have a look and go, what's the unit of work? Okay, should that be true or false? Stick it with something really simple. This will either return true or false. And just write a little statement. Does this person like pie? And there's going to be a yes/no answer. So your test will go, if they say yes, return true, something really simple, and just build up from there and get more complex, and then start to look at how you can bring in patterns, but just get that basic mechanic. And I think there's nothing like playing with the code yourself to get the basics of it and that rudimentary understanding. Once you've got that understanding and you're ready to progress, then there's nothing like pair programming with someone who's experienced, just to see how they approach problems. A large part of coding is about problem solving, not about coding, not about patterns. It's about problem solving, and learning how other developers approach problems and solve them is what makes us all better developers. So that would be my bit of advice on TDD, understanding and learning.
Okay, excellent. So what about learning about some of the work that you're doing, learning about mk.net, learning about the workshops that you're putting on, the Twitch channel? Where could people go to find all of that information?
I guess on Twitter. I'm hoping that you'll share some links for me, Jamie.
Absolutely.
So I'm on most things as Layla Codes It. So I'm on Twitch and Twitter as Layla Codes It. The mk.net is on meetup.com. So you can find us on there. And we don't have the domain mk.net. That would have been cool. If you do go mk.net, I think that's a user group in Eastern Europe somewhere, like Macedonia or something. And we've had chats with them because we're always getting confused. So yeah, not them. And if you want to learn more about Twilio, I'm very open to talking about it. You can contact me on Twitter, as I said, at Layla Codeser, or you can email me, which is lporter@twilio.com. And I'm very happy to help people, whether that's Twilio related or just general coding related as well. I'm always open to help.
Excellent. Okay. So as we're recording this in August, I want to say August 18th. Again, the days they've all fused into one, right? August 18th. What's you said earlier on what the workshop name is, but does it have a website, or is it just sort of it's out there somewhere? Can people go somewhere to sign up for it?
It's actually on Twilio. I can give you the link for it. It will go onto YouTube in time. It's completely free. You just sign up to gain access. It's about 4.5 hours of video. It's the first time I've done this. If you watch it and you're like, wow, if Layla had done it like this, that would have been amazing. Tell me, be kind. But I would love feedback on how I can improve workshops in the future. There is a link on my Twitter to it. I talk about it often on Twitch. So if you like, Layla, what was that workshop? You can come and ask me and I will gladly point you towards it. So yeah, it can be found in places.
Excellent. Okay. Do you have a regular schedule for when you're streaming on Twitch? I know that some people do, some people don't.
Yes, I stream on Monday afternoons at 3:30 UK time. Whatever that might be, BST or GMT. And I have a pair stream on Tuesday evenings where we look at different things. That's on Silicon Orchid's channel. And then I stream on my channel also on Thursdays from 2 p.m. and Fridays from 2:30. I also do another co-stream that's sporadic, which is more on the culture of code. So that's also on YouTube, and that's with my fellow streamer, White Panther. And we talk about things outside of code. So our most recent episodes were on project planning and the problem with half-baked solutions. So that's on our YouTube channel, which is Code Cake TV. And you can find out that. So that might be really interesting in relation to getting acceptance criteria and better solutioning. So Salma, who is White Panther, and I do that show sporadically as well. So yeah, there's quite regularly on Twitch.
Excellent. Okay. I do like being able to discuss coding topics regardless of the language with people. I mean, obviously This is the .NET Core podcast, but being able to say, hey, forget the language I'm using. How would you go about solving this either business problem or requirements gathering problem? I worry that saying soft skills is going to upset some people or turn them off because they're not soft. It's hard to do. And it's more related skills, right?
It's totally integral to problem solving, which, as I said, is the fundamentals of software development. Salma is a technical lead and a front-end developer. So we have different approaches to things. But it's great to team up with her, and we can bounce ideas off each other. So that's really interesting because we come from two different complete backgrounds, from different stacks, different ways of approaching things, but we're united over problem solving.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely be checking it out because I feel like I could always do with leveling up in that arena anyway, and I think almost everyone can. And getting the advice and experience from someone else, again, it's that mentorship idea, right? That even if I'm not going to say this about this conversation because this conversation has been amazing, but if you're sat chatting with someone for an hour and a half and you get one nugget of information out of that interaction, then that was aside from getting to know someone for an hour and a half, that one nugget of information was totally worth that hour and a half conversation, right? Because you can then take that and go, that's what I need to Google to find out a little bit more. That name of the thing that someone said, and then that's it. You're set on this path of improving yourself and getting better, and that wonderful journey that follows from it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Excellent. Well, those are all the questions and topics that I kind of wanted to try and cover with you today, Layla. And you've done a wonderful job. You've been more detailed than I could have ever been about TDD. So thank you ever so much for that. Thank you ever so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a lovely time chatting to you, Jamie. So thank you.
Thank you.
That was my interview with Layla Porter about test-driven development and how you can use it to protect against regressions. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for some more .NET Core goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.